Apologies for the diarrhea lighting. I just cannot. I can't figure out lighting. My little dog is tip-tapping away on the floor. I don't know if you've met my dog. This is Milo. We call her Mimi. She's old and she's deaf, but she's so cute. Mwah! Yeah! Now that I've exploited my dog, let's get into the video. I am way behind on videos. It's becoming a place of stress for me because I just have like a list of videos I've wanted to make. Anyway, this is my long overdue favorite books of 2019 list. Now this is a list of my favorite books that I read in the year 2019, not necessarily 2019 releases. I don't keep up to date on releases enough to have a whole video of those. So I have 13. There are a couple that are series that I'm going to talk about the whole series in one, because that's kind of is way easier. I'm not going to talk about like 3 books that were all in a series separately. Firstly, I want to talk about, kind of in number 13 position, Girls on the Verge by Sharon Biggs Waller. I'm only going to mention this briefly. It's a short, young adult contemporary novel about a girl who is traveling out of state with a couple of her friends to get an abortion. There are heartwarming moments. There are funny moments. It's this, this girls' road trip novel, but it's not a fun road trip. It's a really difficult, tough road trip, and it deals with all, they go through all kinds of things that you would expect to find on a road trip, like cars breaking down and dealing with shitty people and meeting really nice people. And it's just a brilliant young adult contemporary that will definitely hit you hard, but will also warm your heart. And that's all I'm going to say about it. In number 12-ish position, I might have my numbers totally wrong, but anyway, I do have a couple of like romances, like adult romances on this list, which is weird for me because it wasn't until 2019 that I started reading adult romance. The Unhiding Mooners by Christina Lauren. Now this is the only Christina Lauren I've read, and it was their 2019 release, I want to say. You've probably heard about this a bazillion times. It's not my favorite adult romance that I've ever read, but it was really wonderful and I had a totally positive experience reading it. There's the odd weird comment from family members in this book that have been brought up on different creators' channels about weird comments about relatives being gay or like some fat phobic issues, but I didn't personally find anything super alarming. It is about our main character Olive, and her sister is getting married, and at the wedding reception everybody eats the seafood buffet and gets food poisoning except for Olive and the groom's brother. Is he a brother or no, best man, Ethan, who Olive doesn't like. So this book is pitched as enemies to lovers because Olive doesn't like him, and because Olive has made up things in her mind as to why Ethan doesn't like her or why he has been treated her wrongly, and it's pretty much all made up in her mind, so it's not like a true enemies to lovers. It's all just Olive creating drama where there is not drama. Olive and Ethan are the only two that don't eat from the seafood buffet, and so there's this really amazing honeymoon for Hawaii that is booked, and that the bride and groom can't go on because they're super sick and it can't be refunded. So they tell Olive and Ethan, just go, have fun in Hawaii. So they do, and slowly they go from enemies to lovers. It's nice to read. It was just, the setting of Hawaii was really great, and then, they aren't in Hawaii for the whole book, but it's a really interesting storyline. Olive is a flawed character. She has a lot of issues within herself and feeling like she's super unlucky and like the world is out to get her, and through this novel she slowly learns, hey, nobody's life is perfect. Maybe I'm just being a little self-centered. Next I'm going to talk about the second of the 3 romances that I have to talk about in this video, The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. So this is a book about Tiffy and Leon, and Tiffy is looking for an apartment. They live in London, and she ends up becoming the roommate of Leon, and it's just a 1-bedroom. They have to share the bed, so there's like the bed sharing trope, but it's not actually, because they share the apartment and he works night shifts, so he's only there in the day and then she sleeps there at night, and they never really see each other, but they kind of connect through writing like notes and posting them all over the house or the flat. And kind of slowly grow closer in that way. But it's not just a cute, fun romance, and I've said this multiple times in other videos. This does have a lot of other things going on. Leon is a night nurse, and he is dealing with some issues with his brother being in prison for a crime that he didn't commit, and it's super heavy topic in that way. And then Tiffy is dealing with getting over an abusive relationship and coming to terms with the fact that it was abusive, and her ex, who is basically stalking her and who is super problematic. And it just has a lot going on, and I really appreciated that because I like my romances to be filled with life and other issues and not just a romance. Like, I love that. So I really enjoyed this. Briefly, I'm going to mention In an Absent Dream by Shauna Maguire. This is the 4th installment in the Wayward Children like novella series. This basically takes place in our world, but it follows all of these like children and teenagers who have gotten sucked into magical worlds, and then through some sort of circumstances they end up back in the human world, and most of them, they want to be in their magical worlds, they want to be in these alternate realities, they don't want to live in our world, and so they become very depressed. They become like a problem for their family, or their family just doesn't know how to deal with them anymore because they don't really know them, and so they get sent to Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children, is that what it's called? And so in the first book we're introduced to this world, we're introduced to a whole bunch of characters at the boarding school, and then throughout the rest of the installments in the series we follow different characters throughout different times. Sometimes it takes place at the school, but more often than not, it takes place, it's like backstory, where we follow the characters in whatever like world they were sucked into and the life that they lived there. This one follows Lundy, who appeared a little bit in the first novel. She was in the Goblin Market, that's what it was called. But then she ends up back in the human world, but this follows her time in the Goblin Market. I couldn't make this list without mentioning this series because usually a new book comes out every year and they're always some of my favorite things to read. They're super short, but they pack a big punch. Next is the final romance. If I look at my cheat sheet, yes, this is the final romance I'm going to be talking about. I just placed the romances kind of farther back on the list because they're not necessarily my favorite things ever. Like, I do like reading romance, but it's not my favorite genre, and so I just have a lot of other books that I just really loved. But this one, and my list is not concisely like organized. Everything is just, these are my favorites, and then the top 5 are really going to be the top 5, but it's not super organized because my opinions on what my favorite thing is changes like every day. But anyway, I want to talk about Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This got a lot of hype. I'm sure you've seen this all over on BookTube and on Goodreads and on just the internet. Because it's just been everywhere. And this is, although you think of it as, like, I would think of it as a young adult romance, it's actually an adult or like a new adult romance. It follows like college age characters, and it basically follows Alex, who is the first son of the President of the United States, who happens to be the first female president. So it's kind of an alternate reality if a woman had won, and a Hispanic woman at that, had become president in 2016. It follows him, and it also follows Henry, who is the Prince of Wales. It's kind of this fictionalized like Prince of Wales character. Like, I don't know if that's an actual, I don't really know. But anyway, basically this is their love story, and it's kind of an enemies to lovers, but it's not really. They just don't have a super good relationship in the public eye. They aren't like friends, and so, you know, they're kind of seen as, oh, they're enemies. And so when something happens at I can't really remember, but at some public event, some kind of argument or disagreement, disruption, something happens between Henry and Alex. And so it's really bad PR, and so they are forced to become friends and like do a lot of good PR and be shown like spending time with each other and that they're friends to patch up this relationship that the public thinks, ooh, they're enemies. Like, they're trying to cover up anything like that. And so they slowly start to become friends, and then they slowly start to fall in love. But then it also incorporates a lot of other topics, which is my favorite thing in romance. It also deals a lot with politics. It really focuses around the coming up election, because this is set in kind of like 2019, 2020 time. And so it's you know, the next election is looming, and his mother is up for, you know, campaigning for re-election. And it just follows a lot of different topics, not just their romance. And I really loved it. And it was very nice to read, and it would be actually something that I would reread in the future. Now, I don't reread very many things. Alright, next, I don't even know what number we're on now, is maybe the only thriller that made my list. I thought I had more thrillers, but I think I only really have one. that's like full on in the thriller genre. I read quite a few thrillers last year, but a lot of them were hit or miss for me, and this one was my absolute favorite. My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. I believe this is a debut for her as well. I read a few popular thrillers that came out last year, like The Arrangement and The Chain, and let me look at my thing, The Silent Patient, all of which I didn't think were that great. But this one, ooh, it blew me away. This was so good. And I've heard, you know, mixed things, like some people love it, some people don't, so obviously take it with a grain of salt, but I think it was absolutely the best thriller maybe that I've ever read so far, because I haven't read a ton of thrillers. This follows a husband and wife. It follows like a family, but it mainly follows the husband. They are a seemingly normal family. I believe they live in Florida. He's like a tennis instructor and she works in real estate, and they have 2 young-ish or like young teenage children, and you know, everything looks totally normal except for the fact that they murder people on the side. This was definitely different than what I expected from what I had heard. So a little bit of backstory, like they don't just murder people for fun like every other weekend. The first murder that happened was for a really specific reason, because their lives were being disrupted, and after that they were kind of just hooked. And they do enjoy murder. You never see the full story. You're only getting the husband's perspective. It is absolutely so convoluted and so complex and so mysterious, and I did not see the end coming. I don't want to just say any more and spoil it because I don't think you should know too much going into this, but oh, so good, so good. Favorite thriller of 2019. Next I want to talk about 2 books in a series. I read both of them in 2019. Vicious and Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is an adult series following these, they're called EOs, extraordinary something. A bunch of college students, well, a couple of them, Victor and Eli, they're best friends, they're college roommates. They realize that they can become EOs by having near-death experiences, so they start like fucking each other up, essentially, almost dying, so that they can acquire superpowers. And through a series of unfortunate events in college, bad things happen and they become enemies. And so this flashes back and forth from their college days and kind of filling you in on what actually happened. And then in the future, when I think one of them is getting out of prison, it's kind of this cat and mouse chase where they're after each other. And it's just freaking good. And the second one follows up with that. It continues their story, but it also introduces a bunch of new characters, new EOs with really cool powers. And they're really complex characters. And the stories are just so good. And these are books that I feel I could reread again and again and get more information and new things out of them every time because they are so complex. Oh, they're so good. Victoria Schwab, I think I've said this again and again, is one of my favorite writers. She's just incredible. She does so many things. She's also just a really cool person. And I can't wait for what she comes out with next. This is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, and then this is the sequel to that, Bloody Rose. I want to specifically highlight Kings of the Wild. I read both of them in 2019, but I loved both of them. They were both 5-star reads, but I just loved Kings of the Wild just a teeny bit more. I think it was just the characters. They were just so wonderful. This is a fantasy, adult fantasy, which follows in a retired band of mercenaries, and it's just fun. It's really accessible writing style. Like, it just flows so easily, and it's not like that super like heavy, hard to walk through, hard to like, what would you say, slogging through the writing style like in some adult fantasy. Like, it was just super accessible and super fun. Follow Clay Cooper, he's kind of our main character, and then there's 4 others, and they all have to come back together kind of out of retirement, form the band again, because their leader, his daughter, is trapped in a city under siege, and so their leader, he gets the band back together to go and rescue his daughter and her band of mercenaries, as it turns out. And it's just, this fantasy world is so rich with history and with magical creature. There's every single magical creature that you could ever imagine in this series. There's dragons, there's orcs, there's trolls and fairies and centaurs, and it's just incredible. Like, it was just a friggin' experience to read, and I loved it so much. Bloody Rose follows the different characters. It actually follows the daughter that they were going to save in this book, spoilers, not really spoilers, and it follows her band of mercenaries, and it's a very different group of characters, and they're, again, super rich with their backstory and with their histories and the magical creatures, and it's just A+, so good. I hear that he's writing the 3rd book, and I cannot wait. Alright guys, we are rounding out the top 5. I'm going to talk about an entire trilogy. This is the Winter Trilogy by Catherine Arden, The Bear and the Nightingale, otherwise known as. I don't remember if I read The Bear and the Nightingale at the beginning of 2019 or at the very end of 2018, but either way, I want to talk about the whole trilogy. I read for sure these books both in January of 2019. It's just, oh, it's really good. Again, adult fantasy. Now, this is kind of, it feels like young adult. It's written in a very, like, accessible way with very young characters, so it feels like young adult. It is, however, classed as adult fantasy. And we follow, it's kind of this Russian-inspired, magical thing. We follow our main character, Vasya, as she grows up in her father's village in the remote wilderness, very wintry, and they have these magical, what would they call it, spirits or something, that they pray to and they leave offerings to in their village. In order to, you know, bring good tidings, good harvests, good weather, all that. And not a spoiler. Is it a spoiler? No. Vasya's father dies. Now, not many can see the spirits, but Vasya and her stepmother can, and her stepmother is absolutely terrified of them. She feels like they torment her. She's so scared, and so she tells everyone we must stop leaving them at offerings, we must stop praying to them like they need to die off or whatever. And Vasya, on the other hand, can see the spirits, and she is friends with them, and you know, she understands their importance. And so we follow that. There's also some like godlike creatures that wreak havoc on the village and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But we follow Vasya from childhood in this book into like her teenage years, and then in these books she's an adult, and there's a lot going on, but I don't want to get into what these books are about so much because it'll be kind of a spoiler. But we follow her life, well, her young life. We don't follow her until like old age, but we follow her. We follow crazy battles and magic systems and unlikable characters and triumph. I can't recommend it enough, and I'm so excited for what Catherine Arden comes up with next because it was wonderful. And like I said, it's an adult fantasy that is super more accessible. It's not like Game of Thrones or like Brandon Sanderson or whatever. Like, it is, you know, they're not super long books. They're like 300 to 400 pages. They follow young characters. They're super easy to follow and to understand. They're super accessible. And I think that's an important thing when we're talking about adult fantasy, because some adult fantasy, like it can be an intimidating genre to get into. Like, I'm even intimidated by some books and some writers and some series because it's just so dense, so heavy. This is a super accessible series, and so I highly recommend if you are just wanting to get into fantasy, or if you love fantasy and you haven't read it, do it, 'cause it's so good. We have another series that I'm going to talk about. I read the first 3 books in this series all in 2019. I'm going to talk about them all because I feel like for me, that's what really made the experience, was getting the whole story from these 3 books. And I'm currently reading the final book in the series. You can probably guess. It's the Diviner series by Libba Bray. Sorry, they're huge books. This is a series that's been a long time ongoing. I think this first book came out in like 2012 or something. And I hadn't read it for so long, I'd put it off because I don't love historical fiction, but this is a young adult historical fiction magical kind of series that follows a bunch of teenagers in the 1920s in New York, and they have like magical powers. As you can tell, I just love people with magical powers. We follow diviners, they're called, and they all have different powers. Some of them can turn invisible, some of them can read objects, and like when they touch an object they get like the history behind it, or they get flashbacks of things that have happened with that object. People that can start fires with their hands, things like that. And so the whole series is really them all coming together eventually. Like in the 3rd book they're finally all together, and it's really awesome. And it also follows, there's this mysterious stovepipe hat wearing individual who's kind of a ghost maybe, and he's very evil, and they're kind of, it's like a cat and mouse type of thing, this whole series with him as well, where they're trying to conquer, you know, they think that they've beat him off, and then something else happens, and there's lots of ghosts, and it's really involved. There's a lot to explain, a lot going on, but it's all kind of culminating in the finish, which is in this 4th book, The King of Crows, which just came out, and I'm listening to the audiobook. I would say that the 3rd one, Before the Devil Breaks You, was my favorite of these 3. It just really it was starting to tie everything up. Like, we're finally, like, the first 2 books, everything is getting laid out for us, and we're meeting new characters, and we're still kind of figuring out the whole world. But the 3rd book is really when things are going down. The characters are working together. It's wonderful. I didn't explain it well at all, but it's really good. This is the last time I'm going to talk about a whole series again for this video. But I want to talk about the Size Trilogy, or the Arc of the Size series. They're so beautiful, first of all. I read the first 2 early on in the year, and then the final book came out, I think, in November. This is a kind of a young adult dystopian, utopian, futuristic story, where in the future, humanity has figured out how to conquer death. Like, people don't die from natural causes anymore or old age, or if they do die, they can be brought back to life. So the biggest problem facing humanity now is overpopulation. So they have this sect of people that are chosen to be scythes, and they get to just go around and kill randomly. It's supposed to be random anyway, in order to keep the population to a manageable number. And so we follow, in the first book, main characters Citra and Rowan, who are young teenagers who become apprentice to a scythe and to learn the ways, and to one of them is going to become a scythe and have to kill people, and the other one will be killed. Essentially is kind of what the first book is described as. And the whole series, it just is ever expanding throughout the rest of the books, and it just follows so many new characters as you go on. And you really start to see a picture unfolding of their world and what is going on behind the scenes, because it is not as simple as, hey, none of us can die, now we need people to kill us, and that's it. There's so much more going on. Don't be afraid of a young adult dystopian. I know that everyone says they had their heyday in like the early 2010s, but I loved it, and it's almost like a sci-fi series, really. It talks a lot about death. And I was jarred by how like dark and how it really got into my head, but as you go on with the series, it kind of expands from that, and it follows so many other topics, and it's just... My top 2 books, these are like the real top 2. It's not a series, it's not an honorable mention, these are them. And I want to mention them at the same time because I can't decide which one is my favorite. So I'm going to talk about them separately, but I'm going to tell you both of them right now. Anticlimactic, I know. Middle Game by Shauna McGuire and An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. Both of these books have had me thinking about them nonstop ever since I read them, pretty much. I'll just talk about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing first because it's the first one I read. I read this, I think, in May, and it came out originally in 2018, and I'm very excited that the sequel is coming out later on this year. This is hard to explain. It's Hank Green's debut. Hank Green, the brother of John Green. He's finally written a book, and it's fucking amazing. And this follows a main character who it's set in our modern day. What is it, in New York City? Or yes, it's in New York City. And it follows a character who, through a series of events, becomes internet famous. And it also has some like sci-fi elements in dealing with kind of extraterrestrials. Basically this girl, what is her name? April May. She comes upon, in the middle of the night one night on a city street, a big statue, and her and her friend make this like video about it that goes viral because they were like the first sighting. And so she skyrocketed into internet stardom, and just, you know, her life changes forever. So not only does this deal with kind of extraterrestrials and the sci-fi elements and things going on, and like they don't know what's going on in Earth, but it also deals a lot with internet fame and like overnight fame. And I think Hank Green has a great platform to jump off of to start this discussion, because obviously the Vlog brothers, you know, the Green brothers, kind of have this like internet fame that kind of happened not overnight but fairly quickly back in the late 2000s. April May is not a perfect character. She's kind of unlikable, but I loved her anyway. Like, I think it's pretty amazing when you can write an unlikable main character but like I'm still rooting for them. And it was just so good. I want to reread this before the sequel comes out because it has been so long, and I feel like there was so much going on in this book that I have forgotten. I do a really bad job of explaining what it's about, and I'm gonna do that for Middle Game too. Hank really did it. Like, he really did that. We're gonna talk about Middle Game by Shauna McGuire, a little bit beefier of a book. This is another one that is really difficult to explain. It's kind of futuristic. I don't even know what the genre would be. It's probably classed as like sci-fi or fantasy or something, but it's set in our world, and it follows these twins who are separated at birth or when they're very young. And they're being monitored by these crazy like scientists, and they're off in their own lives, but they are an experiment where this crazy mastermind named Reed, he wants to use them to attain godhood because they have kind of kind of like superpowers. Roger is our brother and he is really good with words. He can speak a bazillion languages and he's got the mind for it. And Dodger is the sister and she's incredible with numbers and math and figures and things like that. And they're separated, but eventually in their childhood they create this psychic link between each other. Like they don't really know each other exists, and then they just start one day talking to each other in their minds, and they can like see each other, I think. Or maybe they just talk to each other. I can't remember. But anyway, they live on the other side of the country from each other, but they keep finding a way to come together, and the scientists behind this keep separating them and keep wiping their minds or whatever. And so they keep being separated, but then they keep managing to find each other, and eventually things go down and they have to beat the bad guy, essentially. This is one that I definitely need to reread, and I would be excited to reread because I feel like I would get so much more out of it, because I feel like I just got kind of an at-a-glance version on the first read. There's so much to it. It's not only this, you know, good guy versus bad guy story, but it's also this story of sibling relationships. It's mind-blowing. I don't know how else to talk about it. So I'm done. That's my video. I'm not gonna pick up all those books and make a thumbnail again, so I'm just gonna have to figure something else out. That's my favorites list of 2019. I'm so glad to finally be getting this video made. I don't know when I'll edit it. More importantly, discuss with me in the comments what your favorites were of 2019. But thank you very much for watching, and I will see you soon-ish with another video. Bye-bye.